one. Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Joining me today is Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thanks for joining us again, Dan.
Happy to be with you.
Well, Dan, I know you're based in Ontario, but your membership is across the country. I want to talk first of all about Alberta and what the government has done here when it comes to the pandemic and public health measures. As everybody knows out here, July 1st kind of opened the doors to business in Alberta. No face mask requirements and all other measures lifted. In Calgary, just yesterday, they finally repealed the mask bylaw. So I'm wondering from your perspective, and what you're hearing from members of how has Alberta dealt with this pandemic from a small business perspective?
Well, look, it's certainly been a mixed bag over the course of the entire pandemic, but I will say that one of the things I've appreciated about where the government of Alberta has gone is it has been working harder than many provinces to try to keep as much of the economy open as it possibly can. Yes, Alberta has used lockdowns like most other provinces of the country, but they haven't used them endlessly, like the province in which I sit today here in Ontario. Alberta has applied lockdown rules or other restrictions for periods of time when cases are on the upswing or hospitalization rates are quite high, and then removed those restrictions at, it seems, the earliest possibility to try to make sure that as much economic activity as possible is able to take place. Alberta, of course, is now the first part of Canada to almost entirely remove COVID-related restrictions. I'm looking forward to my visit in a few weeks to Calgary to see my mom and dad and enjoying a little bit of freedom from the incredibly oppressive COVID measures that remain in place in Ontario. Ontario is, of course, the complete opposite approach, lockdowns as far as the eye can see. If you can believe it, just this past week, Ontario restaurants, indoor dining in Toronto specifically, has been locked down for 400 days. Nobody around the country, nobody around the world that I'm speaking to can get their head around it. Yeah. So it's almost like we're living on two different planets, let alone in the same country. Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan have really done, I think, quite well in trying to keep more businesses open for as much as they can. Other provinces, particularly Manitoba and Ontario, have really had the opposite fate for the small business communities there. One of the other things that I will say was a proud moment, I'd say, for us at CFIB. During the first round of lockdowns in Alberta, the province did the same as what was happening in other jurisdictions. They locked down retailers, but allowed big box stores to remain open to sell whatever the heck they wanted.
Yeah.
And I really do appreciate that after lockdown number one, the Premier issued a personal apology to small business owners for adopting that approach, for saying that and said never again would they allow big box stores to sell whatever they'd like while limiting or in fact closing the small retailer trying to do the very same thing. Look, I would have preferred that they never went down that road, like British Columbia, that didn't close down retail for a single day during the pandemic. But the fact that the Premier recognized that and apologized for that, and true to his word, didn't re-implement that policy, I think was certainly a testament to the pro-business thinking that Alberta typically presents.
Yeah, and I guess it goes without saying, right, that the businesses out here, whether they are Saskatchewan, BC, Alberta, face a little better chance of survival than, say, those businesses right now in Ontario?
It's absolutely the case. However, Alberta businesses have had their share of pain. And remember, Alberta businesses were experiencing a pre-existing condition because the economy was in really rough shape as we went in to the pandemic as well. So other provinces were in better overall health than was the case in Alberta because of low oil prices and other issues that the province was facing. Some of the overall policy environment, including oil prices, have changed during the course of the pandemic. Alberta has removed its restrictions. Now, more and more tourists like myself will be heading to the province. I'm hoping that Alberta's recovery will be faster than many other parts of Canada that have been slower to remove some of the COVID-related restrictions as a result. But don't mistake my comments for suggesting for a second that Alberta isn't due for a real shakeout of its business community too. There are tons of businesses that have inherited massive amounts of debt. The Alberta support programs, like grant programs, while they existed, they still didn't deliver near enough support to the local business community. And so I fully expect over the course of the next few months during the recovery, there will be a shakeout and many businesses not making it across the COVID finish line. Many are not going to survive.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the federal government and where we're at with a lot of these programs. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you about, how important is opening up the border for Canadian businesses right now?
It's starting to become a really pressing issue for a lot of businesses, not just those directly engaged in tourism. The fact that we have now changed the policy to allow Canadians to travel to the U.S. or abroad if you're taking on an airplane and come back. If you're double vaccinated, you're able to skip the really difficult restrictions that the government had put in place, like the COVID hotels and then the quarantine period of 2 weeks. So it's good news for Canadians that wish to take a plane abroad, but still the bigger question about when we're going to be able to attract foreign tourists, American tourists that are fully vaccinated back to Canada, that question remains unanswered. There's no time frame that the federal government has established on this front. Business owners understand that it may not be tomorrow that the restrictions will be lifted, but for goodness sakes, we should be in a position to know that we need to meet these milestones, and we're expecting that date to be August the 5th or something like that. Government's given us no information on that. So Americans, foreigners, are understandably looking to take their tourism dollars elsewhere in the world, not bringing those dollars to Canada as a result. And that's a missed opportunity for so many in the tourism industry. When I looked into hotel prices for Calgary, I was absolutely shocked how cheap it was to book a hotel room on the August long weekend. It's dirt cheap, and that's because in big cities, who's coming to big cities right now? We have no international tourists. We also have almost no international business. All those business travelers that would typically occupy some of the hotel rooms in large cities, they're not coming this year, and there's really no signs of when that will be allowed to happen.
Yeah. What about all the government support programs? Where are we at with those ones, the main ones?
Yeah, so lots of news on that front. One, the CEBA loan program sadly ended as of June the 30th. So that program that provided $60,000 loans, that has ended. If your application's already in process, you're okay. But there's no new applications allowed for that. We still are pushing for that program to be put back on the books and raise the total amount up to $80,000 with 50% of that forgivable. Secondly, though, the other bad news is that the wage and the rent subsidy, while they've been extended over the course of the fall, the government is starting to reduce the generosity of the program month by month. So just over the last couple of days, the wage and the rent subsidy have now been ratcheted down about a quarter less generous than they were a month ago. We think that it's way too soon for that to happen. Remember, these programs are now based on, your subsidy is based on the amount of your revenue loss. So if you have a tiny revenue loss, if your customers are starting to come back, you're not getting much at all from the subsidy program to begin with. So it's automatically adjusting based on the improving fortunes of the economy. We don't need the government to reduce the generosity of the program at its core, because the revenue requirement will do that on its own. So we think it's way too soon, especially given that at this point, if you can believe it, about a quarter of Canada's business community are still in lockdown. And even though businesses in Alberta are technically open, what have we been doing over the last number of months? We've been spooking everybody, telling them not to leave their homes. We've been also, so many customers, even though they're allowed to go back to the restaurant, the gym, the entertainment venue, they're going to be reluctant to do so. And we think it's until the borders open and until governments tell us it's time to go back to normal life. When those things happen, then the government can start to ratchet down the programs. But in our opinion, we're several months too early for that to be happening, and it is right now.
You know, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, you know, but what I've noticed recently in Calgary is how many ads I've seen for businesses looking for employees.
Yes.
Is that a concern for the small business community now, especially in particular industries, whether it's retail or hospitality or like restaurants, that it's going to be tough to find workers?
It sure is. We saw a sneak preview of this in the summer of 2020.
Okay.
After the first wave of COVID, the economy, most provinces started to allow businesses to reopen. And at that stage, of course, the CERB was still in place. And the CERB, which was an important program, absolutely necessary at the time, but the way it was structured was that regardless of how much income you earned, you got $500 a week from the federal government. So for some employees, they actually took home less than they were making prior to COVID starting. But for part-time workers, CERB was a fantastic deal. Yeah. I use the example, when I was 15, I worked at a pizza place in Winnipeg growing up, and I worked 1 3-hour shift a week. So let's say that kid that's 15 right now is making $15 an hour. I think that's a bit of a stretch. But even at that, they're making $45 a week if they work, or $500 a week if they sit off on the government benefit. And that is not, so the federal government did move that program into the EI system now, to its credit. There's an expectation that if your employer recalls you to work, you take it, but you could drive a truck through all the loopholes. I got to tell you, they've ratcheted down that $500 down to $300 a week. But I'm really worried that there are going to be a ton of part-time workers that are just not going to return anytime soon to the workforce, creating a crippling labor crunch for so many small businesses, even at a time when they're trying to make a go of it. So labor shortages you can expect, particularly in retail, hospitality, tourism, the service sector, entertainment, arts businesses. They're really going to be crippled over the next number of months. It'll sort itself out, but it's going to take probably the whole fall before that happens.
One last thing, and it kind of relates to what you were talking about just now, but a little off topic. But has the CFIB ever put out a position on, say, a guaranteed income? And there has been talk in Canada about this, right? And who knows?
For sure.
Yeah.
Look, a guaranteed income is an interesting prospect, and we have mixed views from our members as to whether it should go ahead. Certainly, there are some things, for example, that, if you expected the small pizza shop to pay that employee $20 an hour to what, many suggest is a living wage, the business is not going to make it. So if we do have families that are trying to make a go of a single income, of a retail or hospitality job, it's going to be pretty tough. So supplementing that, as Alberta has done with some of the benefits programs for low-income earners, making sure that they have some access to things, there may be some favor to that. But simply giving every Canadian a baseline income, I got to tell you, our experience with the CERB suggests that not everybody will take themselves out of the workforce to sit on some form of government assistance. But we got to admit as Canadians that some people will. And if that happens, if we create that incentive for people not to work, that's not a good thing either. It's a complicated subject because there certainly are many people that are trying to make a go of employment income and just aren't making enough to pay the bills. But a more strategic approach to try to provide specific supports to them, we believe, is a better approach rather than a universal basic income for absolutely everyone.
Yeah. Okay, great. Always a pleasure, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime at all.
All right, super. That's Dan Kelly, President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Thanks for joining us today.